Welcome back to Direct Station, where politics and planets collide and converge. I am Kate Carey. On Friday, the 4th of July, America's birthday, a critical step occurred in our nation's trajectory towards its existential turning point. If this were a TV show, a series, the 4th of July episode would have been a cliffhanger of a season finale. Our collective shadow didn't just get activated. It didn't even just get triggered. It got $2.4 trillion in funding and the full force of federal law. The act, named with Orwellian doublespeak as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, represents the moment when America's unresolved trauma about harm, inequity, immorality, greed, and power over became legally codified with the largest peacetime reallocation of resources in America's history. For those of you who are new here, we track what's happening with the humans by wondering what's brewing in the sky. I assume you've not paid much attention to astrology and think it's a cute hobby at best, something to roll your eyes at maybe. Like, okay, Kate, why are you talking about this now? But if you're here because you know the work I've done in the past, you'll know that I don't tend to do frivolous things. And if you don't know me from Eve, you'll sort that out eventually about me. Either way, you're here because you're looking for a new way to think about what our country is living through. Today, we're going to look at something that turns out to be super interesting about how things are unfolding and what the planets are telling us about times when our country's shadow literally became the law. And if history is our guide, this isn't the end of the story. It's actually a sign that the shadow work can now begin. Because here's what's simply true. Every time in American history when our hatred and our fear of non-white, non-Western people and ideas has become legally codified with massive resource allocations, it has marked not just the triumph of that shadow, but a time when its extremes attract enough attention and enough momentum and enough resistance that America literally reassembles itself around its better self. The moment shadow becomes law is the moment shadow work begins. And this time, the planetary signature is so much more extreme that I believe there's reason to see this as the big one that decides the question once and for all. So today, we're first going to have a look at this grotesque moment to understand exactly what shadow became law poetically on the 4th of July. We're going to look at the astrological forces that made this inevitable. We're going to trace the historical pattern that shows us where this is headed, and we are going to find our way to actual hope through literature, through action, and through practice, because this story has an expiration date, and it is September 2028, with an enormous turning point in February of next year. So it's time to pay attention. Let's get precise about what happened on Friday. Exactly. The One Big Beautiful Bill allocates $2.4 trillion over the next decade, representing the largest peacetime reallocation of national resources in American history. Of that $2.4 trillion, $75 billion goes specifically to immigration and customs enforcement, making it more heavily funded than the entire existing federal prison system. This includes $45 billion specifically for detention facilities to house over 100,000 people at any given time, plus $30 billion for hiring 10,000 new ICE agents with, get this, $10,000 signing bonuses each. All of the men who have been training and arming for their "don't tread on me" moment seem to have arrived at fate's door. They seem to be a little confused about who the unnamed subject is in that sentiment. Don't tread on me. Who is the subject? Who is the treader, right? But here we are. But this isn't random chaos. This is the systemic implementation of Project 2025. We were told this would arrive, and so it has. The Heritage Foundation's blueprint for authoritarian governance has emerged as law. The bill cuts health care for 16 million Americans, eliminates food assistance for 3 million more, provides tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans, and uses the classic, now familiar, fraud, waste, and abuse narrative to justify these cuts. This is the same scapegoating pattern America has used for 249 years from the beginning. It was pigeonholing and blaming and usually exploiting or destroying anybody who wasn't arriving as a well-placed European. In fact, America has long made it an art form to use blame to justify taking resources away from everyone who needs them and giving them to those who already have the most. We blame and punish single moms who work full-time or even overtime at, say, Walmart and still can't make ends meet. But we never blame the system or the corporations who make it so, right? Jeff Bezos' wedding, in fact, is such a stark example of this story that it can help focus our minds on the pattern itself. Right, Jeff, it's the unions that are the problem. Let's problematize and destroy them. All right, so there are 3 shadows I want to talk about today that are represented by this bill. There are obviously many more, but there are 3 main themes that I see popping in this bill that refer back to who America was at its beginning and who, unfortunately, it has continued to be without consciousness, without real reform for the duration of its existence. Shadow 1. Who deserves resources and care? So healthcare cuts targeting 16 million while providing tax cuts to the wealthy represents the same hierarchy that justified denying freedom of movement and resources to enslaved people and indigenous communities while enriching their oppressors, right? That's shadow 1. Shadow 2, who belongs here? The 75 billion detention apparatus represents the same dehumanization machinery used against indigenous peoples through boarding schools and reservations, or the mass removal of Chicanos after the Compromise of 1850, or the institution of slavery writ large. The bill takes this history and scales it up to modern industrial proportions. Shadow 3. Who can hold power? Who can hold power accountable? Section 70302 of this bill strips federal courts of their contempt enforcement power by requiring bonds for anyone suing the government. Just to be clear, when the judge in Texas said, hey, you may not fly these people to El Salvador, turn those planes around, and they didn't. For the next, 3 months, 2 months, that judge asked for more and more and more information, attempting more and more discovery in order to find out if he could, in fact, with real clarity and without any holes in the case, charge the administration with contempt of court. Of course, anyone watching knew that he would be able to, or should be able to, right? But the administration did so many wiggly things and finally brought Abrego Garcia back so that they didn't have to go on with that discovery and they didn't have to face that question of contempt. Well, now this law has made it impossible for courts to hold the government in contempt. There's also a $100 million slush fund in there for Project 2025 co-author Russell Vought at the Office of Management and Budget to continue illegally withholding congressionally appropriated funds. This represents the same authoritarian impulse that allowed slaveholders to ignore federal laws about the treatment of enslaved people, that enabled military commanders to disregard treaties with indigenous nations, and that permitted local authorities to defy court orders protecting civil rights. It's the same pattern of placing white supremacist power over any form of accountability, now codified with unprecedented funding and legal protection. And then we've got this absurd irony that this $2.4 trillion reallocation was signed on Independence Day, using the mythology of freedom to fund the machinery of oppression on an unprecedented scale, while simultaneously dismantling the checks and balances that could have stopped it. It's like America looked at its birth chart and said, you know what this country is founded on? You know what this country that's founded on stolen land with enslaved labor needs? The largest peacetime resource transfer to harm and honestly steal from the less powerful in our country's history. plus the legal framework to ignore any court that tries to stop us. And so it is. So there are many factors in play here. I'm going to talk about 2 of them today. Okay, so thing 1. Astrologically, this is always going to happen. I told you last week about how America is experiencing its first ever Pluto return. The first time since July 4, 1776, that Pluto returned to the exact spot it occupied at America's birth. And where was that spot? It was in America's second house, the house of values, resources, money. Pluto is the planet that forces us to face our deepest pain, our deepest sin, what we hold locked in these compartments deep inside of ourselves, the things of which we are ashamed, our original sin, right? Our unresolved trauma. So for 249 years, America has avoided a full reckoning with what our wealth was built on: stolen indigenous land and enslaved African labor. Every dollar of American prosperity has roots in the systemic oppression of non-European peoples. And now Pluto is saying, time's up, face it, or let it destroy you. The $2.4 trillion bill represents Pluto in the second house at its most destructive. The largest peacetime reallocation of resources in history is designed to cause maximum harm to the most vulnerable while enriching those who already have the most. But here's what's important to understand. Pluto returns are not endings. They are purges. They force the shadow to become so extreme, so obvious, so legally codified with such massive resources that it can finally be seen, named, and transformed. And humans, hard aspected Pluto transits reveal our shit. Addictions suddenly get out of hand. They were manageable and oops, now they're not. Traumatic memories flood the system. Or an abused wife avenges, or all the employees quit because you were an asshole. Or you start a relationship with somebody who's going to hurt you like somebody did when you were young. Or a Thanksgiving dinner explodes in drama. Or, seen from the outside, the respected teacher gets caught having an affair with a student. The workaholic who's avoiding their feelings by screaming into a phone all day finally has a heart attack. A massive fraud scheme somebody thought they got away with suddenly comes to light years later. This is the sort of thing we're looking at, but on a country scale. Okay, so that's thing 1. Here's thing 2 that explains this bill and its role in what's happening. We've talked about this construct of Saturn and Neptune conjuncting, joining in the sky, and we will continue to do so because it's super impactful. But let's look at how it's manifesting in this giant, audacious bill. So Saturn, Mr. Discipline and Consequences, and Neptune, Mr. Collective Delusion, are approaching this conjunction, this meetup, in February of 26. They are super close right now, and they're going to get within a degree of each other by August, late July, August. And they're at a square, a 90-degree angle of activation and causation with Jupiter, Mr. Expansion. So Saturn represents structure and authority, rigid enforcement, right? Neptune represents dreams, delusions, and spiritual ideals. When they come together, you get this rigid enforcement of delusion. When Jupiter, the guy who grows everything, gets involved, as he is now, those delusions get massive. They expand. Things get big, 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 beautiful bill, right? So this Saturnian authority meets Neptunian fantasy, meets Jupiterian helium, right? The $2.4 trillion bill represents this perfectly, using bureaucratic structure, Saturn, and unprecedented resources, Jupiter, to enforce the delusion that immigrants are the cause of America's problems, while simultaneously making this big, hairy, audacious move to literally go ahead and remove any judicial oversight that could challenge that delusion. So, guys, big, Jupiter's expansion, beautiful, Neptune's delusion, and Bill, Saturnian law. It's all very precise. Astrology is like that. That's one of the reasons I find it fun to look at. But here's the pattern I want to dig into today. Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, and we have wholly entered that phase now, historically mark both the peak of ideological delusion and eventually the beginning of a collapse. The rigid structure eventually can't contain its contradictions. Like Saturn's consequences and discipline end up saying, dude, what? Right? Like, I mean, I could go along with you for a while and try to build structure around this like wackadoo idea you've got, but what? Right? And the whole thing comes apart. I submit that this is possible even when it has $2.4 trillion behind it and has neutered the courts. That the planets are bigger and stronger than American dollars and American hate. Okay. And then there's this timer. The exact Saturn-Neptune conjunction happens in February of 26. It's going to get it's very close now. It's going to get extremely close late July, early August. And it's going to be precise, like on top, like the circles will be one circle, like a solar eclipse or a full lunar eclipse, right? So this is the cosmic timer, but it'll be that climax of this aspect. At that time, there's a lot more going on, of course, and we're getting to each piece week by week, but this is a huge trigger of the whole situation. So by February 26th, the delusion will be at peak takeover with this unprecedented resource allocation and authoritarian power grab, or it will show very serious signs of having collapsed under its own contradictions. There's no middle ground with Pluto return energy meeting Saturn-Neptune conjunction energy. And by the way, guys, these two phenomena I keep telling you about, the Pluto return and the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, they're in a sextile. They're in a sextile angle, which means an opportunity aspect. This is really important to notice. Sextiles are an angle. Remember, there's a ton of geometry in astrology. But the sextile says, I got something you could leverage if you want. Like, I've placed a springboard here before the vault. Look at me, I'm slipping into gymnastics metaphors. I've got like Gabby Douglas or Mary Lou Retton playing in my head. So a sextile is like that thing they jump on, you know, before they get to the vault and start flipping around. The springboard is there. I'm sure that's not what it's actually called, but do they have to jump on it? No. They could run right at the vault and hope for the best. Right? It's unlikely that they would pull as much of it off, but it's not required. It's maybe it is, but like in my metaphor, it's an assist, right? And they can take it or leave it. I don't think they ever leave it, but you get what I mean. The main event is the vault. How they leverage that springboard is up to them. So that's us right now. Pluto and his trauma reckoning is at this opportunity angle with the Neptune-Saturn reality dream crash, meaning these two things can work for good if we use them right. Am I making sense? The opportunity is there to use one to work the other or vice versa. It's not guaranteed to just help on its own though, right? There are angles like that. There are angles that it's like, well, this is just going to help us out and it'll make things a little bit easier, right? But it is guaranteed if we take advantage of it. So other aspects are like, oh, that'll be nicer when that hits, right? This is not that. This is like me with my kids with dinner they didn't necessarily ask for when they were little, right? Well, it's there, totally up to you. It's like, I'm not going to make you eat it, but also mac and cheese is not going to arrive. So like, totally up to you. That's your opportunity for food this evening, right? Like the choice is going to be ours. We do not have to take it. Okay, so why am I feeling hopeful about this opportunity? It's because other opportunities, sometimes different, have been leveraged before in order to get out of this Neptune-Saturn mess in the past, in history, particularly in the United States. I mean, in other places too, but I want to talk today about the United States taking advantage of these opportunities. It is possible to leverage the counteractive energy of these two planets in connection towards more freedom after their union has caused an attempt at much less freedom. I'm going to give you 3 times in American history when our shadow of harm to the less powerful for the benefit of the powerful has become legally codified with massive resource allocation and authoritarian power grabs. We think we're living through the worst of it, but it has happened before. And every single time, shadow becoming law marked, my friends, the beginning of shadow work, not the end of justice. So first, during the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in 1917, America passed the Espionage Act of 1917, the Sedition Act of 1918, and the Immigration Act of 1918. These laws, Saturnian impact, made it illegal to criticize the government, expanded deportation powers, and targeted anarchists, which included labor organizers, anti-war protesters, and anyone advocating for workers' rights. So the dream of unrestricted capitalism is the Neptunian fantasy, right? Sound familiar? The government allocated unprecedented resources to enforce and essentially placed executive power above judicial oversight in order to literally cause this idea and make everyone believe in it or act like they believe in it or get the hell out of the country. This hit all 3 shadows: deciding who deserved resources, workers versus capitalists, who belongs here, targeting immigrant organizers, and who could hold power accountable, ignoring court orders. Again, sound familiar? The Palmer raids came out of this. They were a series of raids in that era conducted by the U.S. Justice Department aimed at arresting and deporting radical leftists. They included arrests without warrants, questionable legal practices, illegal searches and seizures. They used the same rhetoric we're seeing now: national security, protecting American values, getting rid of dangerous criminals, dangerous radicals who mostly, turns out, happened to be immigrants. And they backed it up with the largest domestic enforcement budget in American history at that time, while ignoring court orders that tried to stop them. It's kind of uncanny, don't you think? But by 1920, the shadow work had taken hold and conscious care for individuals started to matter more again. A few people did the right thing and public opinion rebalanced. There's a group of Harvard professors who issued a report, or a series of reports, I should say, detailing Justice Department civil liberty violations. Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes criticized the anti-sedition bills. Acting Labor Secretary Louis Post released most of the arrested people despite threats of impeachment. Threats of impeachment sound familiar? The extremism collapsed under its own weight because Americans could see how un-American it had become, regardless of how much money was behind it or how much power the executive had claimed for itself. But this is a good period to use to understand the notion of opportunity. We know how this same rush towards authoritarianism worked out on the opposite side of the planet, right? The Russian Revolution, 17 and 18, during that Neptune-Saturn conjunction, led to a second revolution later that year, led to a civil war that resulted in the Bolsheviks' campaign of retribution and violence, right? That's part of what America was reacting to, after all, right? But it ended differently in these 2 places. Humans have choices. The weather was ripe for competing dreams to clash with new laws. Which side won was an open question. Humans have choices. I'm only here to tell you about the weather. Next Saturn conjunction was in 1952 and 1953. Segregation, a delusional idea, right? Neptunian delusional idea of superiority and inferiority and the appropriateness of a hierarchical society where I am simply better than you because I have a star on my belly and you, Sneetch, do not, right? So this idea, this delusional idea of a hierarchy of who's better than who. So Neptune's dream then was legally codified by Saturnian energy at its most extreme with massive infrastructure, investment, and authoritarian enforcement through the Jim Crow laws. So these laws were the actual embodiment of these two forces, right? Reaching their most rigid, backed by enormous state and local budgets for separate facilities, separate enforcement, separate everything. Courts that try to challenge segregation were often ignored or overruled by higher courts. Sound familiar? The message was clear. White people deserve resources and public spaces. Black people don't, and will spend whatever it takes and claim whatever power is necessary to maintain that separation. Again, all three shadows: resources, separate and unequal; belonging, Black people as second-class citizens; accountability, defying federal court orders. So how did that work out? Well, by 1953, you had the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court dying and being replaced by Earl Warren, who you might remember from the 1954 decision of Brown versus the Board of Education, right? Overturning the legal foundation of segregation, regardless of how much infrastructure had been built to support it or how much power had been claimed to enforce it. 1955, Rosa Parks' individual act of courage sparks the Montgomery bus boycott, in which 40,000 individuals stood up to whatever personal, societal, or employment pressures they had to participate for over a year in a bus boycott, right? The shadow becoming law with massive resources and authoritarian power had activated an awakening response in the Supreme Court, but also in the street. So people at all levels of power made choices, and the thing began very slowly, very surely, to turn around. You don't have the Civil Rights Act until, I don't know, 6 years later or something like that, right? But it began to turn around. The very laws, the very unjustness of the laws started the awakening, started the reckoning, started the shadow work. You can't do this to us. And now we have this giant bill, this enforcement of the delusion that immigrants are the problems and the native poor people are of their own making. The largest peacetime resource allocation now in American history, combined with stripping courts of their contempt power and creating a slush fund for Project 2025 implementation. All three shadows at an unprecedented scale, right? Resources, massive cuts to the vulnerable, and so massive cuts to what helps the vulnerable, tax cuts for the wealthy, belonging, $75 billion detention apparatus, accountability, neutering courts, the slush fund, illegal actions. The shadow has become law with unprecedented funding and authoritarian power grabs, which means if the pattern holds, shadow work is about to begin on an equally unprecedented scale. Each time, the delusion rooted in shadow that became law was specifically about harming, discarding, and controlling people who were not the wealthy and the powerful, just like the original sin, and each time it involved massive resource allocations plus an authoritarian power grab to make that harm systematic and unaccountable. Each time, the more extreme it became, the more money was behind it, and the more power was claimed, the more it activated the collective conscience. Each time, the rigid enforcement of delusion eventually collapsed because Americans could see the contradictions, regardless of the funding and power behind them. It can always go another way, but America really honestly does have a track record of coming to its senses. And this is the greatest reckoning in history, with the skies building towards a massive showdown. This time, that Neptune-Saturn conjunction is in Aries, the skyland of action, of anger, of war, of causation. And there's a bunch of other stuff at play, not the least of which is the opportunity aspect from Pluto saying, psst, hey, use the shadow work to undo this thing now. Let it rise. So we don't always remember this, but the earthly and planetary conditions are more supportive of awakening than any previous period. We have legal precedents for resistance that didn't exist in the 1950s. We have communication technologies that can organize resistance faster than ever before. And we have a generation that has grown up understanding systematic oppression in ways that their parents never did. When you put $2.4 trillion behind something this obviously harmful and strip away judicial oversight, you make the contradictions impossible to ignore and the need for resistance really, really, really urgent. We knew they had to take us to the turning point, right? Well, this law, if we look at the history, is the sign that the process has officially begun. In 1955, it was Rosa Parks. She places herself in harm's way to symbolically take a personal risk in order to gain attention and spark discourse and awareness through her action. In 1920, it was Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes who said, wait, what? The man was in favor of the sedition laws at first, but evolved in public, even though it was dangerous to do so. He spoke out in a significant dissent as one of the many catalytic contributors to the tides that ended up turning. Someone's will step forward. We don't know who it is yet, but the astrological conditions support it. The historical patterns predict it, and $2.4 trillion worth of obvious injustice combined with authoritarian power grabbing makes it inevitable. And when that occurs, where will you be standing? Maya Angelou once captured the hope we need to gather ourselves when she wrote, history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. This is our moment of facing with courage what $2.4 trillion worth of our resources are being used for and what authoritarian powers are being claimed to protect that use. I want to look for a moment. I want to really take a minute and look for a moment at Henry David Thoreau's Civil Disobedience. Have you read it recently? It hits different now. He's writing in 1849, and he's resisting the Mexican-American War and slavery and the poll tax. He says, how does it become a man to behave towards this American government today? I answer that he cannot without disgrace be associated with it. I cannot for an instant recognize that political organization as my government, which is the slave's government also. All men recognize the right of revolution, that is, the right to refuse allegiance to and to resist the government when its tyranny or its inefficiency are great and unendurable. But almost all say that such is not the case now. But such was the case, they think, in the Revolution of '75. But when a sixth of the population of a nation which has undertaken to be the refuge of liberty are slaves, and a whole country is unjustly overrun and conquered by a foreign army and subjected to military law, I think that it is not too soon for honest men to rebel and revolutionize. What makes this duty the more urgent is the fact that the country so overrun is not our own, but ours is the invading army. He's talking about Mexico. But those words ring so true today because the country so overrun is about to be our own. And ours is about to be the invading army inside our own borders, with a budget that is projected to make it larger than most of the world's militaries, including that of Russia. I want to make sure you heard me right. The new budget for ICE will be larger than the Russian military budget. Thoreau's words hit different, don't they? Here's what I need you to understand. This intensity has an expiration date. The exact Saturn-Neptune conjunction is February 26, and the broader pattern bringing the United States to this climax dissipates by September of 28, which, who knows how like the denouement of these things occur, right? But I do notice that September is before November of 28. So is this cosmic timer, what is this cosmic timer telling us about this whole process? Either the delusion completes its takeover with this unprecedented money, an authoritarian power grab, or it triggers a response and a rising of humans who know better. This is what's called for by astrology, and this is what the planets are set up to support if we do the work. Either way, this thing is going to dissipate, right? And I think you and I both know that if it dissipates the wrong way, it's going to be a lot harder to undo it. It's going to be a lot harder to get it going back in the direction that we need it. So we need to act now over the course of this moment until September of 28, right? To cause a dissipation that leaves us standing, that leaves us whole, that leaves us in the country we imagine ourselves to be. So the election is going to happen after this process is resolved, not during it. We will know whether America chose conscious shadow work or unconscious destruction with its $2.4 trillion by the time we are standing in a voting booth or not. I want to believe that that election will not be a nail biter. We will be clear about what's about to happen. We, you and me and everyone we know, has the power to change this. I believe in America. I believe in us. I believe we have it in us to push this back, especially because now this bill is going to escalate the situation dramatically. When you see that happening, don't despair. Watch for the ways in which it's working as a forcing mechanism. What is it making you willing to do? What is it making your neighbors willing to do? Your kids, your parents, your mayors, your celebrities, your influencers, your role models, you. What's it making you willing to do for your country and for your people? So as we wind down, I'm going to leave you with three to-dos, right? 3 things we can think about doing. First, there's an action. There's always action we can take. But here's my thought on what we can do for action this week. We can find one way to refuse participation in this dehumanization while building alternatives, even when that dehumanization has such an enormous price tag on it and has so much court-stripping authority behind it. Maybe that action is donating to immigrant defense funds. Maybe it's attending a city council meeting. Maybe it's helping to build sanctuary in your city. Maybe it's policy. Maybe it's supporting legal organizations, finding ways around the court-stripping provisions. Maybe, are you a lawyer, for heaven's sakes? What are you doing to help with that? Maybe it's having a conversation with someone caught in the delusion, doing your best one more time to talk them out of it. The weather is right for them to be talked out of it, right? Trust that your small action is part of a pattern that is accelerating towards this response to the unprecedented resource allocation and power grab. Do something to break the spell. It is going to be the action of humans that are refusing to participate in the dehumanization process. We never even got into the fucking alligator prison, right? Anyway, whatever your action is this week, let it be about refusing to accept a new pattern of dehumanization in our country. Second, a practice. This is not an easy one. I sometimes give you kind of light practices or new things to integrate, but this is kind of a big one. The week calls for it, I think. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke in a letter from Birmingham jail about the need for self-purification prior to impactful action. He was not saying take a shower before gathering calmly on the street, right? He was saying deal with your stuff. In his book, Strength to Love, he describes the process this way. Only through an inner spiritual transformation do we gain the strength to fight vigorously the evils of the world in a humble and loving spirit. How do we fight against evil while maintaining and honestly enhancing our humanity, our integrity? The practice I invite you to consider is one in which you leverage this intense, taxing time to examine, to consider your own shadow. How is that process going for you? We are all in it somewhere. Are we conscious enough of where we are in it? Are you near enough to your own definition of integrity that you are prepared to stand up for what you know to be righteous? Have you cleansed yourself enough of your monsters, enough that you'll be able to be as much of a part of this mighty collective that we are becoming as possible to push back against their unconscionable cruelty? What do you need for you to feel clear? The time is nigh. What is left for you to face, to undo, to clear out of your psyche so that you know without question that you can stand shoulder to shoulder with those around you and help to turn this back. What does purification look like to you? I invite you to add it, some part of it, some minute piece of it to your daily practice. Hey, shadow, how you doing? Right? Something, touch base with it. Who's in there? What is in there? Do you know already? And if you don't, my goodness, seek support and come to have more information about it. We need our strength. We need a clear mind if we're going to fight this successfully. And third, I want to offer a reflection, something to write about or something to talk to someone that you trust about. What would it mean for America to actually complete its shadow work around people who weren't the white or the wealthy? What would a country look like that allocated $2.4 trillion towards healing rather than harm? That used its power to protect rather than oppress? Let yourself imagine that America. Don't roll your eyes at me. Don't dismiss because it could never happen, right? Again, they remind us every day of what is possible. Anything is possible. They prove it to us repeatedly, right? So our imagination is the first step of our creation of this. The pen is in our hands now. What will it write? Finally, I want to leave you with a poem. Audre Lorde, the goddess of all poets, once said, "Poetry is not a luxury. It is a vital necessity of our existence. It forms the quality of the light within which we predicate our hopes and dreams towards survival and change, first made into language, then into idea, then into more tangible action." And so, in the spirit of our great teacher, Audre Lorde, we can turn to June Jordan and her glorious work, a poem about my rights. I'm going to read the beginning of it and the end of it to you. Or this is a little bit past the beginning. I can't do what I want to do with my own body because I am the wrong sex, the wrong age, the wrong skin. And suppose it was not here in the city, but down on the beach or far into the woods. And I wanted to go there by myself, thinking about God or thinking about children or thinking about the world, all of it disclosed by the stars and the silence. I could not go and I could not think and I could not stay there alone as I need to be alone because I can't do what I want to do with my own body. And who in the hell set things up like this? And she ends the poem with this glorious language. Let this be unmistakable. This poem is not consent. I do not consent to my mother, to my father, to the teachers, to the FBI, to South Africa, to Bedford-Stuy, to Park Avenue, to American Airlines, to the hardened idlers on the corners, to the sneaky creeps in the cars. I am not wrong. Wrong is not my name. My name is my own. My name is my own. And I can't tell you who the hell set things up like this, but I can tell you that from now on, my resistance, my simple and daily and nightly self-determination may very well cost you your life. Chills everywhere. I don't know about you. When shadow becomes law with unprecedented resources and authoritarian power, shadow work begins with unprecedented urgency. We are not just living through America's darkest impulses. We are living through the beginning of America's healing. The $2.4 trillion bill and the authoritarian power grabs it represents are the beginning of the shadow's last stand in America, not its permanent victory. The planets support transformation. The historical patterns predict an awakening. And you're here at this moment for a reason. Trust that your consciousness, your choice, your refusal to participate in dehumanization matters more than you know, especially when that dehumanization has such an enormous price tag on it. If you want to understand how these patterns are affecting you personally, I offer readings that help you navigate a unique relationship with this transformational moment. I offer coaching that helps you navigate it over time. Please leave a review. Please follow. Please send the podcast to people you love that you think could use a new perspective, even if they think astrology is dumb. Until next time, remember that shadow becoming law isn't the end of the story. It is the beginning of the work. And that work starts with each of us choosing consciousness over unconsciousness, healing over harm, connection over separation. Until next time, be well, be conscious, and be kind. I'll see you soon.